welcome. Again, you're joining Europeana 2025, our afternoon session on ethical data. And you should see my screen. So let's get started. Before we go started, let me just please remind you of our inclusive conversation and collaboration guidelines. We would like to ask everyone to listen, be respectful, embrace a learning mindset, respect other people's point of view, own up to any errors that you may make and apologize, and identify when a boundary has been crossed. And together we can make this a productive and respectful session. In case you wish to share anything about the conference, please do so. We are using this hashtag, and you can also tag us with the tag below. So let's get started today, and this is actually the header of the first page, but we actually have 3 talks for you today, and they all share the common theme of ethical data, and that exists on 2 levels, I suppose. So we are going to look at methods for unlocking and disseminating this data, such as artificial intelligence, which comes with its challenges and its ethical problems. But we're also going to look at data that is in itself inherently problematic, and we have a lineup of 4 great speakers for you today. 3 talks. The second talk will be done by 2 people. And I think without further ado, let's just go into the first one. You see it on the screen already. Mr. Markus Stauffiger will talk to us. He is the co-founder of a company called 4 Eyes and Archipanion. And what I could find about him is that he likes exploring new ideas to create an impact with an interest in technology as well as leadership. So I think that gives you a little bit of background on Markus. I hope this is sort of what you would like me to say to you about you, Markus. Please talk to us today about artificial intelligence and archives. You're found a way to make hidden heritage data accessible, unlocking vast collections that are inaccessible due to, the labor-intensive ways that are traditional for manual indexing. But you are talking to us about large-scale text or information extraction using artificial intelligence. Please share your screen. I will stop sharing myself, and please take the floor.
So thank you for the introduction. Maybe add to that list that I'm not an archivist or a librarian or a custodian. I'm a trained computer scientist, and so me and my team, we work closely together with many cultural heritage institutions to try to make use of these tools and to make this interesting heritage accessible. And so I'm going to take you on a journey today through some of the experiences we've made over the last couple of years. But before we start, the question is, why are we even going on this journey? And it's to provide access to this historic records, to these historic documents, and in a way that not only researchers and professionals can access it, but that it's really accessible to everyone. And of course, to help reduce the everlasting backlog I see when talking to all of the friendly faces in this industry. And we're going to expect challenges on this journey. We're going to be looking at errors, false information, biased interpretation, handwriting, and poor scan problems. And if you take a second, you can see that these 3 topics apply both to AI, also computers, but also sometimes to humans, as we're not as error-free as we wish we were. But there's like a lot of hype on all around these AI tools, and my goal is really to turn this into practical tools that can be used in the institutions for you as a valuable tool. And so we can look at where they work and where they might not work that well. We'll be looking at structured information with visual discovery, but also further applications quickly. So our journey starts in Switzerland. This is not a coincidence, since we are from Switzerland and we work a lot with the Swiss Federal Archives. And in this case, we're looking at a collection of index cards from the Second World War. They have about 500,000 prisoner of war index cards there. And the question is there another way to make them really accessible rather than going down in the basement and going through 500,000 cards to find what you're looking for? And so in this case, we've applied large language models to turn this kind of scans into usable data. I'm going to zoom in a second, but this is a process that works quite well. And in this case, we've extracted a few data points, it being the first name, the last name, the date of birth, and later also the place of birth. And you already see the challenges that the computer faces if it has to look at these kind of things. First of all, mixed hand and typewritten, all kinds of handwriting, labels in different languages, though they are only French here, but like, these cards are from all over Switzerland. And also information that's not where it's supposed to be. But that's where the tool of a large language model can be really helpful, because it has a general understanding of what it's looking at, and so it can draw a conclusion and help improve the quality of this data. But just extracting this data doesn't make it useful just yet, because then you just got like a huge Excel file, and that's maybe a bit more interesting or easier, but still not really accessible. So the question is what to do with all this data. Usually the archival information system is not the right place for this kind of data, because these systems are usually not designed to have data in this granularity. And also usually do not have like the search functionality to then search on this kind of level of data. So that's why in this case, we've created a small website where the archivists can then search for the data they've extracted. They can look at the cards. They can verify if the information is correct. And they also see all the scans that belong to one of these cards, because these cards have from like 2 to 8 scans that belong to one unit. And we're already moving on our journey. We're going to Germany now. We're looking at the registry cards of the Evangelical Church. And here, the head archivist is really motivated to create a modern, comfortable workplace. So it's an attractive employer for new archivists. And therefore, yeah, they try to have as much information digital as possible. But we are looking at this example because even if you apply all these tools, you're still in charge of the quality of the data you produce. And this is a good example to showcase this. So we're looking at these kinds of registry cards, and we've seen that before. We can process that with large language models. If a card looks like this, I expect almost no errors to show up. But if you take a second and think about your own registry cards that have been used over decades, they might more likely look like this. And so you can see the challenges not only human faces when looking at this kind of card, but also obviously an AI system, because this is not only about creating a transcription of the data that's there. You obviously have the handwritten notes, which are handwritten always a bit of a challenge, but also it requires interpretation of what is actually there. And in this case, someone needs to make a decision, like what kind of information do we want to keep digitally, what is actually accurate. And they even went to the basement sometimes to really check the materials, and then updated the information so that they don't have just a transcript of this registry card, but actually have an up-to-date digital collection. And since it's very painful to go through a list of thousands of Excel rows, and a PDF that has thousands of pages. Again, we went back to help with a user interface that's quite easy to use. You have the scans for this data set. You see all the data. You can edit, add, and correct information, and go through all the cards. And so you in charge, or is still responsible for the quality. This works well if you have like a limited set. These were about 1,500 cards. If you're looking at collections like we looked before with the in total 500,000 cards, you would need to resort to spot checks to make it even like feasible. But at the end of the day, you still control of the quality. And now our third stop takes us to Canada, where I'm actually right now because the Canadian archivists have their annual conference, which I'm attending. That's why I'm presenting remotely and not on site. So we're going to the Galt Museum and Archives in Alberta. There, Andrew, the head archivist, has this really interesting collection of photographs from a newspaper archive, but he has just the photographs with no metadata available, and they depict the life of his community over decades. And so this is a very interesting collection and also interesting for like the general public. But the question is, how do you make this all accessible? And so here we apply an AI that has been trained with about 5 billion images from the internet to help identify or like help make a kind of a visual search where you can do a description of an image or what you want to see visually, and the AI system tries to understand as best as it can what you're looking for, and then shows you the matching or the most likely results to your search. And I've titled this here 18,000 photos searchable overnight, because to get to this level that is out there, and I'll share the link at the end of the presentation, it took no human effort. We had just a computer do the grunt work of going through these photos and providing this kind of search functionality where I can search whatever comes to mind. And it works quite well for general topics, because you can imagine the AI has been trained with like the publicly available images in the internet, so popular topics are very well in the training materials. And that's then the drawback maybe of this solution. It's if you have underrepresented in things, or you want to look for very specific things, it will probably not recognize that. Meaning, if you're looking for the specific church in your village, it will likely not find this specific church, but you can still search for churches and maybe a bit of a description, and then go through the images, and then you will find you will likely find then the church. And this is an example Andrew has put on the website as an example to use it, because you can do also very abstract searches. That would not be possible if you had a traditional cataloging of these images, such as like people having fun. So a very abstract kind of way to search, and it generally provides a very low level entry into these archival records, which are hard to find otherwise if you're not familiar with how archives work. I have two further examples quickly, showing that you cannot just use AI for one thing, but you can also use AI in the same like process multiple times, or maybe different AI tools to solve different cases. Again, here we were processing index cards. We extracted data. We've seen that before, but in this case, this finding A comes in twins, so we used it to find the twins, and then we used again large language model and other AI tools to start linking this information to others. And the last example I'm showing is this is experiments where we asked the large language model to describe objects, in this case coins, and you can see here in the left column that it can create a it can create a description that's quite okay. Since large language models know multiple language, it can also help you get a first understanding of what is there, even it's in a language you're not speaking. And for the fun of it, we also try to see if the large language model can put this into historical context, which worked quite well in this case. In other cases, if it misidentified, for example, the city that is depicted in the coin, the historical context went completely in the wrong direction. But this was like an experiment to see what's possible. And now we're arriving home, which is the most important step of this journey, because you see all these examples, and this is very interesting, but it doesn't provide you much value other than maybe an idea here and there. So my question is like what to do with this on Monday, that you could actually start using these tools for you that haven't done so. And first of all, I really encourage you to be curious, to be vigilant. AI is a tool to help with information management, and this sounds very similar to some of the activities you do in your institutions. And I'm not going through here in detail because I have the link after in the next slide where you can look at this, but this is your homework for the next week. When you go back to your institution, you start on Monday, you make sure you have the tools, you start playing around with the tools, and then you start discussing with your colleagues what you've learned, because this will really speed up the build-up of your experience. When you play around with this at this stage, make sure you use only information that's already publicly accessible and that it doesn't have any personal information or other problematic data you may not want to be out there in the wild. And so, yeah, I'm really curious for your questions, your ideas. Maybe take a screenshot of the QR code or scan the QR code. It will take you to a website where you find all the information and also your homework to do.
Thank you, Markus. Let's see if there are any questions. I see a few coming in. First of all, I find it interesting that I guess you don't work on Friday, because some of us actually can start with this already tomorrow instead of having to wait for Monday. I see I see one question from Rosella Franco. She says, are these available to the general public to see and review? And I'm assuming she is referring to the examples that you gave.
Yeah. So the visual search, these are publicly available. Like again, if you scan the QR code, I have a few examples of a video archive, but also the GALT I shared. The other data extraction things are not publicly available yet, but if you reach out to me, I can like freely talk about it and show you some examples if you want to look at those.
Rosella, I hope that answers your question. Then there is another question asking about the margin of error. So how often do you need to correct the AI results, and how many, how do humans get involved with that?
Yeah, that obviously the question there is, it highly depends.
Yeah.
We are in the process of doing an error calculation on this registry cards I've shown you, so the pink ones. We see preliminary numbers say about a third of the cards did not require any edits. About 60% of the cards required a few edits, but we also don't have in this case any precise numbers, because they did not just correct the transcription, but they actually corrected the information, because it's a finding aid, and so the error rate is realistically a bit lower. But it highly depends. The more and the older the handwriting, or this makes a huge difference there. And so we need to see, the quality bar needs to be set in advance, but also in relation to the records. So like I said, if you have to process tens of thousands of records, it's not realistic to correct them all. If you have smaller numbers, it might make sense to look through all of them.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. Then here is another question, but this time I'm taking the liberty of asking one myself. You said that you use large language models, and obviously AI needs to be trained. Did you train it on specific data, or did you use pre-packaged libraries?
We try to work with things that don't need training to like not create this huge workload. So the visual search model is being trained, like I said, on a publicly available data set of about 500 million images. And the other times I think with the examples I've shown, we used the current model at that time from OpenAI because it returned the best quality and the data protection situation was okay for us to use these models.
Okay, thanks. Unless there are any other questions coming in right now, I think it is time to move on to our next speakers. I see some thanks for you, Markus, in the chat. So yeah, let me add
You're
to that
very welcome.
as well. Thanks for your interesting presentation. And we will now go to the next one, which will be given by Elisabeth Stadlinger and Christoph Steindl. Elisabeth studied Italian and Russian in Vienna and then Bologna. She works at the Austrian National Library and manages projects there, specifically to do with the digital library. And she supports in her work digital access to the library holdings for research purposes. She is going to talk together with Christoph, who studied media informatics in Vienna at the university there. Worked before as a software developer and a systems administrator, and has now moved on to work and be the head of the Department of Research and Data Services at the Austrian National Library. He focuses on questions regarding data management, especially where it comes to GLAM institutions. Together, they're going to talk to us about digitized collections towards a critical reception. The point here being that the digitization and opening, subsequent opening and presenting of archives and holdings can be a challenge if they contain problematic objects. And they're going to advocate for a responsible view on the collection's content. And they are going to tell us how they implemented ethical responsibilities, supporting users' digital literacy and critical reception. Please, yeah, you've already shared your screen. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jochen, for the kind introduction. And hello from Vienna. So being involved in several digitization projects at the Austrian National Library, today we would like to reflect on how to make cultural heritage data with problematic content in a contextualized way, again, readable and reusable. These reflections will be on a quite general level, but we will also focus on a specific showcase at the Austrian National Library. After 1.5 decades of digitization, the digitalization of cultural heritage objects has become a quite recurrent phenomenon, as it is considered a fundamental tool for protection and preservation. This can be done on the one hand by mass digitization of an institution's holding, but on the other hand, it could be a specific collection chosen for digitization, as you can see here. And if it comes to digitized collections with specific problematic content, of course, the question of contextualization becomes an urgent need. And this happened to the Austrian National Library during the project History's Picture and Text, which was funded in 2023. And it was chosen to digitize 2 collections. They're under the graphics and portraits of the Swiss pastor, writer, and theorist of physiognomy, Johann Caspar Lavater. The ONB hosts 22,000 objects of this collection, which is a really vast and important source for research on 18th century because of Lavater's active network and connectivity to other artists, writers, and intellectuals of his time, which sent him sometimes portraits, or he even asked them for having them. And he then collected some of these portraits, but also asked painters to make portraits of fictitious persons, and then created his essays on physiognomy, designed to promote the knowledge and the love of mankind. Lavater's working method was then also to comment on his graphics. So we can see sometimes he added a title, then he did a categorization, and then he did a pure deeper comment here. And we chose 3 examples here. The first one is still a quite positive evaluation, saying that despite the fact that maybe the nose and the mouth are in too small distance to each other, this face suggests brightness and intelligence. On the second picture, we can see a female figure, and Lavater is describing her in a condensed way as empty and weak. And on the third one, this here is clearly racist. Lavater is saying that this person is maybe limited to the capacities of an animal. And while conceptualizing the various publications form we had to do with this collection, because also of funding conditions, of course, we had to think about how to publish this kind of content. And on the one hand, we had to think about the diverse repositories we have, so the Access repository, and there was also requested to store this data in a long-term repository, but then also we have the database of the catalog there. Another section is more on the front end, so we had to think about the catalog, which is consulted by the users. Then we have 2 collection-driven platforms, which are called ONB Digital and ONB Labs. And within the project, we were able to implement a new tool for online exhibition, which gave us a bit larger possibilities to contextualize this problematic content. And not at least, one of the funding conditions was to transfer the data to the national platform Kulturpool, which then aggregates the data to the Europeana. And as a kind of compromising bridge, it was decided to set a disclaimer on the whole collection of Lavater.
Thank you, Elisabeth, and also welcome from my side. As we've seen, we have had this use case of contextualization for data with the collection Johann Caspar Lavater. And in the next slides, I'm going to present you some schematic possibilities how institutions like the Austrian National Library could contextualize the data. But it's also important that we'll highlight some problems that might likely occur during this process. At first, we can see depicted on this slide quite in general the objects of an institution like the Austrian National Library. So we have heterogeneous data and no form of the data itself at the moment. But as researchers and archivists start to work with the data and add metadata to the objects, they eventually can be assigned to collections with similar content or with relevant content for this object. At least in the field of the libraries, it normally works this way. And what we see here is also the ideal case that we don't have any problematic objects in these collections. But in general, that's not the case. So we will also have to deal with problematic content in general, which can be seen here in red. And of course, not all objects are problematic themselves. So this leads to some collections with problematic objects and some without them. And probably this case is not depicted here. There are also some collections that have consist entirely of controversial, questionable objects. So now is the question: how can we deal with these problems and these problematic objects? So we can try to set up and introduce an indicative publication mode. And this can be done on several layers. So the institutions, cultural heritage institutions, can take responsibility for their objects and just enable this publication mode for all of their collections. We can think, as Elisabeth mentioned before, one possibility to highlight these objects would be things like a disclaimer, but I will show other examples later. So this would be the most global approach, but of course this leads to the problem that at some point probably the users won't notice this general information and won't recognize it. So, and on the other hand, it can only be done on a very, very general, in a very general way. So you cannot contextualize single objects. You can only contextualize the entire collections of one institution in the same way. This leads, of course, to the next step, that you only could highlight or flag some of these collections problematic. But as you see, this might lead also this might also lead to the fact that some collections without problematic objects are tagged as will be contextualized without the need for it. So also neutral collections are affected. The other approach would be to concentrate on single objects and focus on individual objects. You can start to highlight only these objects where you know this might be problematic, but this might lead to the assumptions by the users that all of our data has a flag if it needs it, but in this case you see also some objects where no attribution like as problematic content is done. But you can, of course, if you work on an individual basis, you can give a very, very specific contextualization. You can say this object has bias A and this object has bias B, and you should be aware of this. And last but not least, there's also the possibility to contextualize both like individual objects and entire collections, like some kind of hybrid approach to this, this program.
And so how to approach and practice the contextualization? I'm waiting for next slide. Yes, there it is. Of course, in the first moment, there are always coming discussions. Are there any eventual precedents out there? Is there any standardized contextualization methodology existing? Or have there been research projects that already established a vocabulary for this? And on the other hand, there are many constraints as e.g. the number of objects. Many collections have thousands of objects, and these objects may require also a conservation and restoration treating. And of course, maybe they have to be cataloged again. And these constraints then meet the desired objectives, and that would be, as Christoph already mentioned, maybe an object-specific contextualization, so that the contextualization could be done on the level for every single object. And on the other hand, there is the publication-specific contextualization. As we have seen before, there are several publishing formats that data is going to meet. So one has also to think about, okay, if we are doing this, then what would this, or how would this affect another platform, or what would this do with our catalog? Because you have also to think about the quality of catalog if you do some contextualization work on a standardized way. And then at the end, I guess in many institutions that's the case. You have to find a pathway to contextualization in the middle of these objectives and the constraints. One idea is to integrate the disclaimer into the metadata. This is a very GLAM-specific methodology and could work quite well because we have all quite standardized and structured cataloging methods. But as you could see with the case of Lavater, there is no predefined field in library catalog, a space for a disclaimer. So there had to be found a solution for this. And the other option is to give a detailed textual contextualization, which in Lavater's case was offered by the online exhibition, because then you can dedicate a chapter especially to the problematic content. But you can also show that not all objects of these collections contain problematic content. So it's a really better possibility to give deeper explications on this holding.
Thank you. So I will finish up our presentation with some technical implications and the questions of how to highlight and show problematic content in practice. And there are, of course, the two extreme situations. You can give just full access on the one hand and just hide it on the other hand, like full access was no access, or at least hide these objects themselves, but you can, of course, provide the metadata for them, but hide the objects. But in between, there is a range and different, also some stages. So as mentioned, you can add some information text like a disclaimer to an object or an entire collection, as we did. But also you can add more and more labels and tags in the metadata. And when metadata is also, of course, the origin of the institution that an object is coming from. It's also like significant for the object itself, and there you can work with either implicit or explicit labels. You can limit the usability of the objects with the possibilities of, for example, blurring or using border marks, or you can restrict the access by additional approval to access the content or trigger warnings, for example. And in order to do this, you have to store these kind of contextualization metadata information. And what we want, our message is to store it as metadata, because metadata is very close to the object itself, and this contextualization needs to be close to the object itself. In our case, we did it as a catalog field, as Elisabeth already mentioned, and doing this, it's possible to be visible also in online platforms. And of course, this comes with some challenges, because it needs to be stored in a kind of way that it's both computer readable and human readable, and harvestable, and can be harvested from different institutions, and also that the method of contextualization can also be implemented by other institutions. Like in our case, we have a national aggregator, Quadruple, and the international aggregator, Europeana, for our objects, and it must be ensured that these also can deal with our method of contextualization and the data itself. And especially in the case of Europeana, we also have the multilingual need to provide a multilingual contextualization for English-speaking community. Thank you for your time. We hope that we could make you and your institution aware of these problems of contextualization, and that is also part of the digitization in general. And we hope that we can discuss with you how we can do this, how we can approach this problem also collaboratively. Thank you.
Okay, thanks both Elisabeth and Christoph. Are there any questions at this point? We don't have a lot of time for questions. We're running a little bit behind, but I think we have time to answer one or two. So please type in the chat if you have a question. Otherwise, I do have one. And it's maybe, I don't know if it's related, but as Europeana, we have worked on the DeBias project not too long ago. So there are other initiatives in this area. I don't know if you've considered an approach like that, or if you're even aware of what it does.
Yeah, we have been aware of the DeBias project, but it's really quite difficult to integrate it into a library catalog. So it's very good if you have explicative text. So I think so for museum objects, it would work quite well, but not in this case where we would really wanted to contextualize it also in the catalog and so on. So that's still a challenge, I think.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. I think we should move on to our next speakers. But thanks for your insightful analysis of this problem. It is indeed a problem, and I hope that I hope that lots of people reach out to you and discuss this thorny issue with you. So thanks, and let's move to our next speakers. And our next it's just one of them, and it is Mara Metzmacher, who studied art history at the University of Vienna and also studied stage design. After her studies, she worked in various archives and collections, and since February 2024, she's been part of the Public History Department of the House of Austrian History. She's responsible for the recording and scientific cataloging of the collection objects and the online collection. Today, she's going to talk about how to make charged objects accessible. Similar theme as the previous presentation. Representation and reuse of objects related to Nazism, specifically in a new online collection database. It turns out that a significant part of the collection of the House of Austrian History consists of objects related to the history of National Socialism. And the question is, of course, how to make these objects accessible within the common European data space for cultural heritage. Apologies. Mara, please take the floor.
Yes, thank you so much. And hello to everyone who's joining. Yeah, let me just start. I hope you can see my presentation. Let me just start by introducing the museum real quick. So we are Austria's first federal museum of contemporary history, and were founded in 2018. And the collection holds material evidence of Austria's history, starting from the mid-19th century to the present day. And we receive many objects for our collection from private donors. And through these donors, we often receive objects related to the history of National Socialism. And that's why they are making up a significant part of our collection. And when it comes to these objects, there's often one question asked, and that's how to actually deal with those objects. And that means on a personal as well as on an institutional level. And that sometimes also means to navigate a really compelling area of tension when it comes to donor expectations and institutional approaches. But as a museum, we see it as our mission to work with this question in the physical as well as in the digital space. So in the next section, I will tell you a bit more about our approach and on basically our ongoing discussions about how to make objects from our collection related to the history of National Socialism accessible and comprehensible in the digital space. Oh, that's wrong, sorry. So first of all, the question on how we as a museum can work with content related to National Socialism has been with us since the start. And it doesn't just concern, as I mentioned, the digital space, but it also means the physical exhibition space and basically all content that we publish. And let me just say, most importantly, it is an ongoing process with us with no final answers that we have yet. But as part of developing our new online collection that will be going online beginning next year, we basically designed a set of key principles under which we decided to make charge objects accessible. And those charge objects, that basically means mostly, but not exclusively, objects related to the Nazi era or propaganda material. And as a first step, we actively discussed and made the basic decision that we wanted to include this object group in an online collection. Because for us, it was more important to make these objects accessible under certain conditions than to, let's say, in quotation marks, hide the material evidence of the Nazi era out of fear of misuse. But we decided not to include, for example, objects of violence that fosters voyeurism or humiliates victims. So we therefore carefully select all objects that we publish online. So no unintentional bulk upload of data. We also settled on an approach to distort the content and effects of propaganda, for example, through language and descriptions, as well as curatorial-led object photography, and also to highlight agency and responsibility connected to those specific objects. So here I want to give you a glimpse on our process, especially regarding the curatorial-led object photography. So here you can see images of a set of children's toy soldiers from the 1930s, early 40s. Unfortunately, I cannot go into the historical context here, but just to give you some key points, how we process it. So we try to avoid any dramatic staging of the objects or like kind of a reenacted staging. That would be the example here on the left side. So we rather wanted to show the figures in the stage in which they were actually stored. That would be the example on the right side now. And we have taken care not to depict the propagandistic military context of those figures. And that's why they overlap and they are not fully visible. And for us in the online collection, it is not about a reproduction of the object per se. So we also try to hide the NS symbols, and we deliberately not show them, as you might see here on the right side. And in general, in case of propaganda material, we decided to use low resolution images in the online collection. So of course they can be used and are accessible, but with this we try to prevent any aestheticizing use of them, basically. So now I want to give you an example of our approach of distorting the content through wording and contextualization. Again, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into detail, but just to highlight some important aspects here. So this badge collection from the Winter Relief Organization, short WHW, came as a donation as well to the museum and was used as propagandistic tool. So already in the title, we tried to distort, or let's say to avoid the NS language by not quoting the original title of the series. And we clearly label them as propaganda material, as you can see. In the description, it is important for us to give reliable, profound, but also accessible information on the objects and to analyze them in their historical context. And we therefore explain specific terms such as Volksgemeinschaft, which is a term that was used by the Nazi regime to describe a community that aligned with their ideology. And in general, we try to avoid to emphasize the aesthetic character of those objects and rather highlight their intended purpose or propagandistic use to really understand their historical context. And another important aspect for us is to include the story of its subsequent use as well as donor perspectives. For example, we specifically mention here that the donor mounted the badges on cardboard and labeled them to increase their sales value, basically. So this also helps to understand what significance or even value those objects still had even 50 years after the Nazi regime. And another, let me just, sorry. In the last part, I would like to briefly mention our legal handling regarding propaganda material. And this is specifically for propaganda material. So the image on the left shows a photograph attributed to the photographer Heinrich Hoffmann in form of it's a sticker that was used for propagandistic purposes again. And so in general, our decision was, because of its specific content and provenance, we do not consider propaganda material to be works in a legal sense. And thus we consider them no subject to copyright, which enables us to show images online. But of course, that does not mean that we can freely produce reproductions of the images. It's just about the access in the online collection. And the images in general will be made available under the CC BY NC license, and that enables reuse for education and research purposes, but forbids the reuse for commercial use. So already to my conclusion. Basically, our solution to this complex, of course, question was just to start the process and to be okay with having no final answers. And for us, making charged objects accessible means that under certain conditions, museums can make a decisive contribution to enable the responsible reuse of cultural data and content related to the history of democracy and dictatorships in the digital space. Okay, that's it for me.
Thanks, Mara. If you have any questions for Mara, please add them in the chat. I know there's one already from Rosella, who says, well, first of all, says he loved your loved your presentation, and was just curious, what is the significance of the colored blocks next to the statues that you showed in the presentation? And I think we're talking about those army figures.
Here, right?
Or there, yeah.
They are for comparison for colors. It's basically that you can match the right color in the photography with that you have a reference, basically, a color scheme. So you really get the colors right. And
right.
Another aspect is actually that you can reference there by size. So you have a here it's very small, but here you can see the centimeters. So you have a reference for that.
Thanks. I hope that explains the question, that answers the question. Are there any other questions from Mara at this point? Oh, there is one just came in from Sam, who asks, have you consulted the legal team to check if your argument about propaganda sticks? I'm not sure if it's legally sound to use CC licenses for materials you don't own the copyright to. I understand the intention, he adds, but it begs the need for other specific tools for problematic collections.
Yeah, that's true. So we checked with our legal team, and as you said, it's not like legally it's a different handling of the copyright in case of propaganda material. But we, as an educational institution, decided to actively not to stick to that, and let's see if we get any complaints or legal disputes. So yeah, we are not sure about that yet, but we are really careful what we show and still make the argument for that and hope that it conveys. Yeah.
Okay, Sam sends his thanks in the chat. I don't know if there are any further questions from Mara at this point. Otherwise, I do have one. Maybe a bit controversially, but you mentioned that you hit the flag with the swastika on purpose. There's obviously an argument to be made that showing it would add context to that object. I guess these are difficult decisions to make. Are you adding that context then back in through maybe descriptions or something like that, or how did you look at that? How did your team look at that?
Yeah, that's it. So we try, if we don't show things, we try to put it in the description, basically. So to give the context via the text and not via the photograph, because we wanted to not to enable like cutting out specific symbols and using the images for problematic purposes, basically. So all our context goes into the description. That's why you see it's so long.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. There are several people who appreciated your presentation and say that you're doing interesting work. So I would like to convey that. I think I think we are basically at the end time now. So I would like to thank Mara and the other speakers, Markus, Christoph, and Elisabeth, and that's just the order. I see them in my screen, so my apologies for that. For their very interesting presentations on these thorny issues, on these difficult topics. I do want to end on time because other sessions are following and they need to use the Zoom room and so on. So sorry to cut it off here. Thanks again. Enjoy all of you the remainder of the conference, which is just a few hours, but do enjoy them, and I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much.